Thank you, Chairman Keane. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to begin my testimony by asking the question, why did Al-Qaeda attack America's iconic targets on 9/11? I want to answer that question because I believe that even to this very date, many Americans, including policy and decision makers of the United States, do not understand why Al-Qaeda mounted those attacks on America's most outstanding landmarks. You must turn and examine Al-Qaeda's founding charter that was written by Dr. Abdullah Azzam, the founder of Al-Qaeda, in March 1988, and published in Al-Jihad, the Journal of the Arab Mujahideen, publication that was printed in Peshawar, Pakistan during that period. According to the charter of Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda is the vanguard, the pioneering vanguard of the Islamic movements. That is, as the spearhead of Islam. According to Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda must mount attacks that will inspire and instigate the other Islamic movements as well as the wider Muslim community that seeks to support, that Al-Qaeda wants to build support in order to continue with their political agenda. If we look at the charter very clearly states that Al-Qaeda has a role as the pioneering vanguard. And it is because of that specific role that Al-Qaeda mounted attacks very selectively on your outstanding landmarks, on your iconic targets. Because by charter, Al-Qaeda has a responsibility to show the way to these other movements, that the United States can also be attacked and destroyed the same way the Soviet Union was reduced from a superpower into a Russia. The same way the largest land army in the world, the Soviet army, was defeated in Afghanistan by the predecessor of Al-Qaeda, the Maktab al-Khidamat, or the Afghan Service Bureau, an institution which even had 30 officers inside the United States during the Cold War, when Maktab al-Khidamat fought against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And Al-Qaeda wanted to show the way to many other Islamic movements, wanted to empower these movements. And that is why Al-Qaeda built, with the assistance of Taliban, state-of-the-art terrorist training and operational infrastructure in Afghanistan. Throughout the 1990s, Afghanistan became a terrorist Disneyland where more than 40 different terrorist organizations were training and using Afghanistan as an operational base. At the time, the United States, its allies, and its friends intervened in Afghanistan in October of 2001. But for 10 years, the US government, European governments, the international community tolerated Afghanistan from becoming the center of gravity of international training, the center where terrorist organizations planned, prepared, and executed operations. If we look at the previous attacks conducted by Al-Qaeda, all those attacks were mounted either by members who were trained in Afghanistan and using Afghanistan as a training base. The US government and many other governments have seen 9/11 as an attack that is very different from all its previous attacks. But if we look at the trajectory of Al-Qaeda operations, there is an incremental escalation in Al-Qaeda attacks. Look at August 1998, the East Africa bombings. Al-Qaeda mounted land suicide attacks against the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, coordinated simultaneous attacks. If you look at October 2000, Al-Qaeda mounted a maritime suicide attack. If you look at 9/11, Al-Qaeda mounted an airborne suicide attack. And look at the sophistication of the organization. When Al-Qaeda attacked those American targets, those land targets in East Africa, the Americans increased the perimeter security of their land targets. Then Al-Qaeda attacked a maritime target. Then the Americans increased the perimeter security of their land and their maritime targets. But then Al-Qaeda again deceived the United States and conducted an airborne suicide attack. Al-Qaeda could have never mounted those attacks against those targets on 9/11 if it did not use airborne vehicles, air vehicles to attack those targets. So, and also if we look at the targeting of Al-Qaeda, there was gradually a larger number of fatalities. There was an increase in sophistication of the organization. The US security and intelligence community, the US think tanks, the US political leaders knew that Al-Qaeda will strike the United States. If we examine the reports of the Central Intelligence Agency soon after the East Africa attacks, the US agency warned that it is a question of time that Al-Qaeda will strike inside the United States. But there was more than an intelligence failure. There was an operational failure. There was a failure to act. You knew that your country will be attacked, but you did not do what was necessary to prevent your country being harmed and humiliated. You knew that the intention of Al-Qaeda was to kill American people wherever they could be found. But still you did not act, and therefore you paid a very heavy price for it. In the future, if you want to prevent these attacks, you must continue the path that you have adopted after 9/11 in terms of establishing closer security and intelligence cooperation, especially with the Asian and the Middle Eastern Muslim countries. Because today, the threat has moved beyond Al-Qaeda. Today, we are confronting a large number of Islamist terrorist organizations. Let us look at the two waves of attacks that we saw in October last year and May this year. The attacks in May this year were staged on the 12th of May by Al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia. On the same day, there were attacks in Chechnya. On the 14th of May, also attacks in Chechnya by Al-Ansar Mujahideen, a group that is very close to Al-Qaeda. For example, the head of the Al-Ansar Mujahideen in Chechnya, his real name is Muhammad Al-Ghamdi. He goes by the name of Abu Walid. Muhammad Al-Ghamdi is the cousin brother of two of the 9/11 hijackers, Ahmad Al-Ghamdi and Hamza Al-Ghamdi. So you can see the coordination of the attacks in that week of May between Al-Qaeda and the Chechen group. Then again, on the 16th of May in Casablanca, the Casablanca attack was not by Al-Qaeda, but by an associate group of Al-Qaeda called Asirat al-Mustaqim. Then again, the previous day, that is on the 15th of May, again an associate group of Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e Jangvi, attacked 21 Shell and Caltex stations in Pakistan. Coordinated simultaneous attacks. Within half an hour, 21 stations attacked. So you can see within that week, Al-Qaeda, Asirat al-Mustaqim, Al-Ansar Mujahideen, and Lashkar-e Jangvi coordinating attacks. So what I would like to say is that the threat has certainly moved beyond Al-Qaeda. The last point I want to make is, let's look at the attacks in October of last year. The worst terrorist attack after 9/11 occurred in Bali on the 12th of October. That was not by Al-Qaeda, but by an associate group of Al-Qaeda called Jama Islamiyah. Another group, Al-Qaeda had armed, trained, financed in Afghanistan during that 10-year period in Afghanistan. And that same week in October, we saw attacks against the US, against the French oil supertanker Limburg of Yemen, and also killing of 2 US personnel in Kuwait, which was by Al-Qaeda. So you can see that in the future, because we have damaged Al-Qaeda's training infrastructure so significantly in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda will increasingly rely on organizations and groups it had trained, armed, financed, and ideologized, that is, given their ideological training of the need to wage a universal jihad, not a territorial jihad. And these groups will continue the fight. Al-Qaeda will more or less remain in the background, will be more an ideological provider because it lacks the operational capability, while these other groups will continue the fight with Al-Qaeda in the background. So it is a long-term threat, and to fight this kind of threat, you need a multi-pronged, multi-dimensional, multi-agency, and a multinational response. The United States, although is the most preeminent political, military, economic, and diplomatic superpower, you cannot defeat this kind of threat unless you continue to work with your allies and your friends, not only in the military field, but also in the political, ideological, diplomatic, in the economic fields. Thank you very much.